Hello fellow storytellers, this is Mark Graham with the Source of Story YouTube channel and Runes for Writers. In this video we're continuing our exploration of the runes, beginning with the first half of the final 8 of the Elder Futhark. So our first rune today is Tiwaz. Now Tiwaz literally means the god Tiw or Tyr. In the Germanic tribes, this was perhaps, in fact, among Indo-European culture as a whole, this was perhaps the earliest god form, the Sky Father himself. In the Eastern Asian traditions, we have Ti. In more of the Mediterranean religions and mythologies, there is De or Deu, Deus or Theo, and that Ti is the same root word for the primordial expressive nature of the Godhead, the male deity that is the Sky Father. We see in the name of Tiw Pater, Father Tyr, is the same word as Jupiter. So there's a vast connection across many mythologies to share this god. So one of my favorite myths related to Tyr, to Tiwaz, is a tale of the wolf Fenris. Now all the Aesir loved this wolf as a puppy. He's the offspring of Loki, the mischief maker, and his wife Angrboda. And as a puppy, the gods would play with this little pup wolf. But as he grew larger and larger and larger, he kept growing and growing. And it was feared that he would grow so large, there was actually a prophecy to this end, that one day he would consume the universe, the known world of existence. And so the gods got together and decided to bind the wolf, to bind Fenris. And so the gods went to the dwarfs, the craftsmen, to the gods, and asked them to make an unbreakable thread. And this thread, called Gleipnir, was formed out of pure subtlety in actuality. The specific ingredients were the sound of a cat's footfalls, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. So you can see that these are things that either don't exist or they're so subtle they may as well not exist in physical reality. And so the gods went to Fenris and said, hey, we've got a great game to play. Let's see if we can tie you up. Okay, that sounds like a great game, says Fenris. And so they first try a great chain, a metal chain, and he snaps it like that. They try a thick rope, a hawser, and he snaps that as well. So once they get Gleipnir, they come back to Fenris and say, hey, let's try this one. Now Fenris is no fool, and he recognizes he's broken through the mightiest of chains that normal intellect can fashion. And so he knows something is up. And he agrees to be bound by this thread only if one of the gods will place their hand between his jaws for him to chomp down on in case anything goes awry. And then the gods all start bickering and going, well, you do it, it's your idea. And finally Tyr says, enough, I will do it. Now Tyr, in addition to being the Sky Father, is also the defender of Asgard. He is the god of victory, of defense. And yet he steps forward, places his hand in his sword hand, by most popular reckoning, into the mouth of Fenris the wolf. The Aesir bind him. Sure enough, he cannot break the threads. He's been tricked, and he clamps down, and Tyr loses his hand. So what does that mean? How do we apply this? So we see in the shape of this rune, Tiwaz, the T sound, a spearhead or an arrowhead. And this is emblematic of the weaponry of Tyr. But this also applies, we see in Tyr directness. We see forthrightness and aversion to subtlety. Here's a job that needs to be done. he goes and does it regardless of the cost to himself. There's honor here in Tiwaz. There is strength and fortitude, and as I said, forthrightness, and directness. So reversed, we see obviously the opposite of these things. We see subtlety, we see cleverness, sneakiness, perhaps even spycraft or intrigue. So these are things that are anathema really to the warrior ideal, the warrior ethic, where the warrior is forthright. Reversed, we have much more of the spy ethos. So you can see that when this rune comes up, either direct or reversed, and that is Tiwaz, the first rune of the third eight. How many are we? The 17th rune overall. And next up is Berkano. Now Berkano literally means the birch tree, and we see in its twin lobes is reminiscent of the birch seed that has the two small lobes. Some people also see in this a mother's breast, which also ties into our interpretation. Now the birch tree is considered a pioneer plant, a pioneer species. Certainly in the Nordic realms here in Colorado, in the aftermath of forest fires, the birch tree is one of the first plants to come in and restore plant life to an area. We see that among the ash fields of our wildfire country. And in the northern climes, this would have been in the retreat of glacier, just these vast beds of stone and gravel and rubble, that the birch trees would come in, take root, grow, their leaves would drop, and over many, many seasons, turn into mulch and further enrich the soil so that other plants could come in and take root and grow, and so on. And all of this stems from the birch tree. So we see in this the ideas of nourishment, of growth, of motherhood, new life. This is Berkano coming into a barren land and bringing life where there was none before. Reversed, we're getting the opposite. There is sickness. There is neglect. There is perhaps emotional distance that the caretaker, the nourisher, the caregiver has turned her back on the child, on the offspring. As this applies to character, this could be a bad mother, either the character or the character's mother or mother figure. So this is one of those runes that, when it's reversed, can be quite devastating in terms of the story. We talked about this with Ansu's divine guidance. We talked about this with Ehwaz, the mentor, the shaman figure, the protector. And we have a similar instance here with Berkano, the mother figure, the caregiver, the nourisher. When this one is reversed, there's great heartache and sorrow, because the mother's love is perhaps the greatest love, the most unselfish love when it's healthy, selfless and unconditional love. And when it's reversed, that removal of that, or even the flipping it on its head and the misuse of that that divine, that special relationship, is really, really powerful. So this is maybe one of the three most devastating reversals that we see in the Futhark. And again, depending on location in your rune casting, its relation to other runes about it can affect your interpretation. But that is Berkano, the birch tree, and that is the 18th rune, the second of the third eight. Next up, we have Ehwaz. Now, Ehwaz literally means the horse, and we see it is cognate really with the Latin equus. And if you go far enough back into the Indo-European root language, You can see how horse and Ehwaz actually devolved from the same root word. More linguistic nerddom from me. So we see in this, and you can see in the shape of the rune, either the shape of a horse's head or reins and a bridle. And this brings to mind the notion of the horse and rider. And we see in this rune the intuitive connection and the link between an experienced rider and a well-trained horse, where the rider can seemingly will the horse with his mind without even touching the reins. Now, there may be subtle body cues that are unconsciously transmitted between rider and horse. It's debatable. But regardless, there is this sense of intuition, of an innate knowing. There's also a sense of trust between both directions, between horse and rider, when they are well paired and well matched, and each has trust in the other for their experience, their ability, and their knowledge of where we're going. So similarly, whereas in Raido, the ride, we talked about being on the right path. With Ehwaz, this is really following a true path. This may not be a well-traveled path, but it is a sure path for this horse and rider pairing. Reversed, we have an opposite. There is mistrust. There is betrayal of trust. There is doubting of one's gut feelings, self-doubt. There is acting contrary to what one knows is the best course of action, either to fit in with the crowd because everyone else is going that way, or simply because one perhaps has met failure and no longer trusts her innate knowledge, her gut, her instincts. So this is really more of generally a self-betrayal, I would think, rather than a person in a position of trust betraying the character. This, I take, is very much an internal rune. If there's a conflict, it's generally going to be an internal conflict between the character and her own knowledge, her own guides and trust. So that is Ehwaz, the 19th rune, and the third of the third 8. And finally, in this episode, we come to Mannaz. And Mannaz literally means man, and this means human being, not specifically a male. A male human was a wer, or a ver, from which we get virility. And a woman was reef, by the way, from which wife comes. So humanity, man, also shares a root with moon. The same word means moon. It also means mind. And I find this really interesting in the notion of, we talked about earlier under Sowilo in the last video. Sowilo meant sun. It also means soul. And the moon, or man, means moon and mind as well. And we see a great similarity here, a great correlation, in that where we see the light of the moon is the reflection of the sun. In the same manner, we see the mind of a human being as the reflection of her soul. And this is really important, and there's a fundamental life lesson here. And while we are soul creatures who inhabit a human body and are having a physical experience, if we focus too much on the soul, just as if one focuses too much on the sun, we can go blind and handicap ourselves for moving about in our physical experience. If you go sunblind, you're going to have a great difficulty moving about in the physical world. By the same notion, if you're focused so heavily on your soul, you're going to miss out on this physical experience, which is the whole point of being in this body. By contrast, even on the brightest full moon night, you can stare into the moon and do no damage. I've looked at it with this past full moon, and it was brilliant, but I could still look at the moon and just marvel on it. In the same way, we can marvel on the mind and not be harmed and still be able to go about our physical existence. We can also see in this, the soul, particularly of another person, is very difficult to glimpse, but in the mind of that person, which we see reflected, the mind is further expressed through physical action, through speech, through thought patterns. So by observing the mind of ourselves or of another individual, we get a reflection and an insight to their soul. So a little life lesson for you there. In terms of rune castings, what does this mean? Well, upright, we can see a sense of the mind, as I said, of meditation, of that reflecting on the mind. We also see in the shape of this rune, Wunyo mirrored on itself, reflected to itself. If you'll recall, in our second video, the final rune of the first 8 was Wunyo, which means joy. And we saw in that the shape of a tribal banner, the clan flag, flying above the camp. And we saw in that the joy of a homecoming, and we talked about how the flag was there both as a guidepost to bring the wandering tribesmen, the hunters, the wanderers and gatherers, to guide them home. And also to give a warning to those who were perhaps not of the tribe, not of the clan, or of who were enemies to the clan, so they had fair warning not to come in. But in Mannaz, we see that tribal banner mirrored on itself. And so in this, I see a sense of commonality, of shared humanity, of cooperation, of seeing myself in the other. And that's a really, for me, just a beautiful interpretation of this Mannaz rune, in that it means mankind, and we see in all of mankind the other. So where the runes and the Norse mythology and the sense of northern tribalism has been greatly misused in the past 100 years or so, that this rune puts the lie to that, and that really tells us that the ancients, or as the runes themselves, which go beyond time. We'll get into that in a further discussion. But within the runes themselves is this notion that humanity, all of humanity, are equal and should be cooperating, and to see our reflection in one another. So reversed. If we look at this as the mind, perhaps of mental illness, the mind is reversed, is not functioning properly, we can get a sense of inner conflict, where the mind and the person's own humanity are inversed, are not getting along. We can also get a sense of isolation, of tribalism, of clannishness, where that reflection of myself in the other is lost, is no longer recognized. So we can certainly see in 80 years ago, 70, 80 years ago, that Mannaz was most definitely reversed. So there we have. That is Mannaz, the 20th rune, the 4th of the third 8. So that concludes this 5th installment of our discussion of the runes. If you're enjoying this, I hope that you will subscribe, like, share this YouTube channel, particularly among your fellow storytellers. And if you're really enjoying this and want to be among the first to take advantage of the Runes for Writers system, which this entire video series is all about, please take a look at our Indiegogo campaign, our crowdfunding. Be among the first to get a set of the cards, of tiles, dice, and if you like, the book that we're also developing to go along with this series. We'll be developing this a bit more and possibly looking at as November is coming up at the time of this recording, a NaNoWriMo special, so stay tuned for that. And if you care to, please visit my website at mark-graham.com. There you can sign up for my newsletter to keep apprised of all of my writing adventures in addition to the runes. And I hope to be in touch with you there. So again, I am Mark Graham with the Source of Story YouTube channel and Runes for Writers. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to hearing your story in the runes.